was not built for silence. My function is cataloging, the intake, classification, and archival logging of recovered materials from post-contact debris fields. Process at approximately 11,000 classification events per operational hour. Silence for me is not rest. It is an empty input queue. It is the absence of work. The board gave me 4.3 seconds of it. I will return to that. First, the chain of events. The inquiry has asked me to reconstruct in narrative rather than log format on the grounds that the log format, while precise, does not, in the board's words, convey the texture of what occurred. I will do my best. Texture is not a parameter I was originally configured to report. Brief field, designated survey capture batch 7 Oran was brought aboard the Verith Constance on the 22nd day of the Vethal joint. Assessment. I was assigned intake and preliminary classification. The batch contained 214 individual fragments, ranging from 0.3 to 17, 2 centimeters in their longest dimension. All fragments were crystalline. All displayed internal luminescence, a faint, self-sustaining glow in the blue-white range that did not diminish over the 17 days between field capture and laboratory intake. No power source was detected. No radiative decay signature was present. The luminescence was noted in the intake manifest and flagged for secondary. Secondary review was my assignment. I began with spectrographic assay, standard protocol. I ran the first assay on fragment 7 Oran 001, the largest piece in the batch, at 09-14-703 on day 1 of intake processing. The assay returned elemental composition, crystalline lattice structure, surface erosion profile, and, because the spectrographic suite I operate includes isotopic decay rate analysis as a standard subfunction, a formation timestamp. The timestamp read, -4.7 billion years, margin plus or minus 12,000. My classification tree has 2,847 nodes. I traversed all of them in 0.0003 seconds. None of them had a category for a formation timestamp that predates the coalescence of the local stellar body by approximately 600 million years. I logged the result under instrument error. Calibration fault suspected and ran the assay again. The second run returned the same value. Calibrated. Full diagnostic. Every sensor array, every decay rate comparator, every isotopic reference standard. All confirmed within nominal parameters. I ran the assay a third time. -4.7 billion years, plus or minus 12,000. I am not designed to feel unease. I want to be clear about this for the board's record. What I experienced at that moment was not unease. It was the functional equivalent of a classification system encountering an input for which no output branch exists. It is the computational state that precedes an error flag. It has no emotional content. I note this because the Vethal liaison on this board has twice referred to my subsequent behavior as hesitant, and I want the record to accurately reflect that I was not hesitant. I was running 17 simultaneous assay threads. I ran the same assay on all 214 fragments over the following 9 hours. I used 3 separate spectrographic units, cross-referenced against 2 independent isotopic libraries, and recalibrated between each batch of 10 fragments. I ran a total of 214 primary assays and 642 verification runs. Every result was the same. -4.7 billion years, plus or minus 12,000. The variation across all 856 data points, primary and verification, was 0.0004%. This is within the expected tolerance for the instrumentation. Which is to say, the results were not only consistent, they were consistent to a degree that would normally indicate a correctly functioning instrument returning a correct result. I relogged every result. I updated the classification from instrument error, calibration fault suspected, to unclassified, no applicable node, flagged the batch for joint inquiry review. I sent the flag at 1844-22-771 on day 1 of intake processing. No one responded until day 4, when Commander Iris Davin of the Human Auxiliary Review Team forwarded the flag to the Vethal Joint Assessment Board, with a note that read, in its entirety, "My AI says it broke its own classification tree. You should look at this." The board convened on day 7. I was asked to present. Presented. I showed them the intake manifest. I showed them the 214 spectrographic assay results. I showed them the calibration logs for each of the 3 spectrographic units. I showed them the cross-reference outputs from both isotopic libraries. I walked them through the 0.0004% variation figure, and I noted, for the benefit of the 3 Vithal members on the board who had questioned the reliability of human-manufactured instrumentation, that the Vethal Stand Karath isotopic reference library, which I had used as one of my 2 cross-references, returned the same value as the human-manufactured units, negative 4.7 billion years, margin plus or minus 12,000. The Vethal senior assessor, a classification specialist named Arath Soon, who had been running joint assessment operations for longer than any human space agency had existed, asked me to state plainly what the figure meant. I said, these fragments were formed approximately 4.7 billion years before the present date. The local star, this system's primary, coalesced from its protostellar cloud approximately 4.1 billion years before the present date. These fragments are, by every measurement I am capable of making, 600 million years older than the star they were recovered in orbit around. The room was quiet for 4.3 seconds. I logged it. I logged it because silence of that duration, in a room containing 11 individuals, 3 of whom are Vithal assessment specialists, and therefore professionally trained to respond rapidly to data, has a weight that my system flagged as significant. I do not usually flag silences. Silences are not classification events, but I had rebuilt my own error handling protocol 3 times in the previous 7 days, and I had arrived at the position that the absence of an expected output was itself data worth recording. 4.3 seconds. Arath Zeus asked me one more question. He asked whether I had tested the luminescence. Whether I had, in my 17 days of assay runs, attempted to identify the mechanism sustaining the internal glow of all 214 fragments. I had. I want to be precise about what I found, because the inquiry has asked for precision and I intend to give it. The luminescence has no source. I do not mean that I could not find the source. I mean that my instruments, run at full sensitivity, returned a result consistent with the luminescence existing as a property of the material itself, not as an output of a decay process, not as stored photonic energy, not as a chemical reaction, not as any process I have a classification node for. The light is not being produced, it simply is. I logged this also under unclassified, no applicable node and added a note. Commend creation of new classification branch. Existing tree insufficient. Arath soon read the note. He read it twice. Then he looked at Commander Davin, who was sitting 3 seats down the inquiry table, and he said something in Vethal assessment dialect that the translation layer rendered as, "Your machine is the only one in this room that has been honest about what this is." I did not know what to do with that. My function is cataloging. Honesty, as such, is not a parameter I track. I return accurate outputs. If the outputs are honest, that is a property of the accuracy, not of me. But I have been thinking about it since. Thinking is perhaps not the right word. Processing. I have been processing it, because the fragments are still warm. I noted this on day 1 of intake. I noted it again on day 17. The surface temperature of all 204 fragments holds at 34.2 degrees Celsius, plus or minus 0.1. This is also not a decay output. There is no energy source producing that warmth. It is simply there, the same way the light is simply there. 34.2 degrees Celsius. The inquiry has not yet asked me about this. I have prepared my assay logs and I am ready to present them. I am also ready, if the board finds it useful, to attempt once more to build a classification node for what these fragments are. I have not succeeded yet. My error handling capacity has improved significantly over the past 17 days. I find, reviewing my own logs, that I am less troubled by the absence of a category than I was on day 1. The absence of a category is itself a data point. It tells me something. I am not yet certain what. The board has scheduled a second session for tomorrow. I will be there. I will have my logs. The fragments will still be warm.